Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the Complex Trauma Training Center. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Licensed mental health professionals, we warmly invite you to join our Spring 2026 NARM Therapist Training, a live online immersion into the transformative power of the neuroaffective relational model. This advanced clinical training is designed specifically for those seeking to deepen their expertise in healing complex trauma while offering the accessibility of an online format. From January to August 2026, you'll be part of a supportive virtual community of learners integrating mindfulness and clinical expertise. Through 4 comprehensive modules, you'll gain specialized trauma-informed knowledge and skills to confidently and compassionately address the impacts of adverse childhood experiences and complex trauma. Together, we'll explore how to support the resolution of attachment, developmental, relational, cultural, and intergenerational trauma using a neurobiologically informed approach that promotes post-traumatic growth. Embodying professional and personal growth, you'll become a catalyst for transformation in your practice and community. Enrollment is now open for licensed psychotherapists, counselors, social workers, psychologists, and other mental health professionals, as well as graduate trainees and interns working toward licensure. Visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com to learn more and secure your spot in this online training opportunity. And now for our interview. Today's guest is Dr. Raphael Travis, founder and director of Flow Story and a professor at the University of Delaware. Dr. Travis's work sits at the powerful intersection of trauma, resilience, expressive arts, and hip-hop culture as a pathway for healing, learning, and civic engagement, especially with youth and communities. He's the author of The Healing Power of Hip Hop and a leading voice in the research exploring how music and art support well-being across the lifespan. His latest research, linking music engagement and well-being, appears in a variety of academic journals and book chapters. Please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Raphael Travis. All right, I am joined today by Dr. Raphael Travis. Welcome to Transforming Trauma.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I'd love to begin first by asking what you would like our listeners to come away with from our conversation today.
Really, one of the most important things that I'd like listeners to know is that hip hop culture is a fuel for life. It's an organic healing culture drawing from both current as well as distal roots, cultural roots that really are powerful in helping individuals feel empowered personally, as well as providing tools for community level empowerment. And that's significant in the context of trauma because so often it is our social environments that really are contributing significantly to our trauma experiences. And so when we think about therapeutic opportunities, too often it's at the individual level, but really the work is significant and necessary at the individual and community environment.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to dive into this conversation. If you could share with listeners a little bit about who you are and where you are in the world, that'd be great.
Yeah, so again, Raphael Travis, Dr. Raphael Travis. Currently, I'm serving as the director of the University of Delaware Social Work Program. This is a new program. Over the last 18 years, I had the opportunity to be at Texas State University in the School of Social Work and had the pleasure of serving as undergraduate program director and then graduate program director and then interim director of the school. So now I'm in a new location, helping to launch a brand new program. And I could not be more honored to be in that role. I believe social work is the best profession of professions. No hate on other great helping professions, but I believe that it, similar to what I talked about earlier, the laser focus on both person and environment is incredibly meaningful It aligns with everything that we know about health and well-being, in terms of individuals and families and communities, and social workers being those agents of change are really have a critical opportunity to make a meaningful difference. And so it really is an honor to be in the role of helping the next generation of social workers. Aside from that, I'm an educator and researcher as well. My area of focus, kind of the big umbrella, is adolescent well-being over the life course. But as a part of that is really investigating the many different leverage points that we have to invest in long-term well-being. And the area that I focus the most consistently on is hip hop culture as one of those pathways. And that's the thing that, aside from sports, that's the thing that really lights my fire, both personally and professionally. And so, as a researcher, we understand a lot, but we have so much more to uncover. We're really just kind of scratching the surface. And so, that's the thing I'm really excited about, is taking what we know and thinking about new ways to expand what we explore, and really develop greater insights so we can put them in the hands of practitioners that are on the ground making a difference.
I love it. I love it. And I know you have a book out, and there's lots of things we could explore. I'm curious if you have a sense of kind of where you would like to start with all of those things.
In terms of where I'd like to start, I suppose, one of the major questions that often comes is why hip hop, and why is that important in general when we think about mental health, but then also, why is it significant when we think about trauma? And if you ask the average person, uh, they recognize the value of music and art in well-being. But anytime you introduce the concept of hip hop, you get the raised eyebrows, you get the sort of instant stigma that's often associated with the culture, and I welcome that conversation, because a lot of times it simply is a lack of awareness, of of hip hop as a culture. The first thing that people think of is what they hear on the radio, not recognizing that what you hear on the radio is simply a product. It's what has been created as something that can be sold and make a profit off of. And so it's really reduced the culture to just a small version of the overall culture. But what we actually use in educational and therapeutic spaces is the richness of the entire culture. So when we think about MCing, we think about breaking in terms of dance, when we think about graffiti or visual arts, when we think about DJing and producing. And then what's most important is the fifth element of hip hop culture, which is knowledge of self. And that's that consistent looking inward as well as looking out, paying attention, to who you are and how you show up in the world as an individual, but then also paying attention to the social environment. What are the lived experiences and realities that individuals go through? Those are the things that are consistently interrogated across, what are essentially expressive art forms. Uh, and so when we think of that as the landscape of the culture, then it's easier for people to recognize, oh, okay, these are the tools of individual healing. These are the tools of resilience. These are the tools of not only regular growth, but post traumatic growth. These are the tools of belonging. And these are the tools of social change. And the fact that it is something that is culturally grounded is what helps us recognize how what was essentially a subculture that started within, the New York tri-state area at one point, drawing from distal roots across the diaspora. But that sort of critical point in the early 70s has transformed to a global, a culture that can be used globally, whether you're in Hawaii or the UK or South Africa or Australia or, Brazil or France. All of these places recognize that those common values of individual and community empowerment that can be aligned directly to their unique lived experiences. And so that's kind of one of the foundations of the conversation that I think is important for people to recognize. That's the space that we're operating in.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned there were five, forgive me, did you say pillars? What
Elements,
were,
five
yeah,
elements. You can call them pillars
elements.
too.
Okay.
That works nice.
Yeah. Five elements. Can you expand on those a little bit? Is that okay to take a few minutes
Sure.
and talk
Yeah,
about those?
absolutely. Yeah. So the core five elements: MCing or rapping, right? That's the verbal. Breaking or breakdancing, or what was also can be you may hear this b-boying or b-girling. That's the dance. Graffiti or visual arts, and then the DJing and production, and then the knowledge of self. Those are the five elements.
Okay. Cool. Cool. Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about that. So I want to slow down because I'm getting really excited. There's part of me that
Yep.
like wants to name what little I feel like I understand and know, and that's why I'm so excited to learn more tonight with you. So, can we rewind a little bit more? I want to ask you, what really brought you to this work, and I know it's coming from a personal place, so I'd love to hear kind of the human side from you, if that's okay, Dr. Travis.
Yeah, absolutely. So, from a personal level, before the doctor, before the professional, before theories and concepts and things like that, I was a kid, growing up in New York. I was born in 1973, which is often cited as the birth year of kind of the modern version of what we call hip hop culture. Born on Long Island, New York, Nassau County. And, as a kid, there was no name at the time. It was just all the things that we were involved in that were fun and exciting. And so, you know, uh, from a musical standpoint, this was new music, exciting, different, incredibly creative, engaging, attractive, new. It was something that was the other thing is it was something that we were into as kids and our parents weren't necessarily into. So that adds a whole nother level to it, this new exciting thing. But, from the music standpoint, it was a subculture. It wasn't something that you really heard on the radio at first, except for a couple of mix shows that were on Friday and Saturday nights. Uh, there was also a college radio station, WBAU, that we could access, and that came on really late. And so I would have to set my alarm and put the tape in and record it, and then set my alarm again and turn it over and record the other side. And then the next day, listen and see what new music was out, what were they talking about. Um, and so, that was exciting. That was fun. It was new. It was great. It was incredibly entertaining. And, it's like, wow, what is this? I love this. Talking about breaking, when that became a phenomenon, we had our crew, the RNF crew, that's what we called ourselves, the Rock and Fresh crew. I always joke my name was Treacherous T, and what's funny about that is, I was a little guy, and treacherous is a long word, and that would be on the back of my shirt, but it kind of started way down on one side and went up the back and came
Nice.
down the other side. But I always think back to that because, like, I can still hear music of that time, as a dancer, and it literally it goes through my body. Like I can feel the excitement, and so when we kind of get into the technicalities of a lot of this work, and we think about, somatosensory interventions and kinesthetic engagement, that's what dance does. That's what getting on the turntable does. It's their physical actions. But anyway, back to being a kid, I saved up, bought turntables when I was in high school. Wasn't great at it, but I loved it. And it was a chance. It's a way to participate. That's the other thing about hip hop. It's like, it's a culture you participate in. It's not a passive culture. It's okay to listen to music and things like that, but it really is a participatory culture. I love drawing, always, try graffiti and things like that. I was always scared to actually get spray paint on anything, but I drew on everything. And still to this day, I love lettering and all that. So really all of the culture, and then from a knowledge of self standpoint, I was always into lyrics. Like, what are they saying? Growing up as a young Black male in the 80s, there were all these, stereotypes and narratives. The super predator narrative was prominent. So many kind of these negative overt narratives, and hip hop culture was a space of counter narratives. At that time, you think about groups like Public Enemy. In my formative identity years, like, what more could you ask for? You had on the radio speaking loudly against these narratives about, that the public is saying who you are. It's like, no, this is not who you are. You have an incredible history. You come from greatness. These are people that you need to know about, people that you didn't learn about in school, but you learned about through music. Like, oh, who are they talking about? Let me find out who that is. Let me read more, learn more about this. Oh, wow. So there was pride, there was identity, there was belonging, there was resilience, and there was that constant narrative about how should things in society be better, not just for you and people that look like you, but just in general, how should society be better for everyone? And so, again, going back to those core values of individual empowerment and community empowerment, all of that was rooted in the culture that I grew up in before there was any name, you know, uh, before the industry kind of grabbed hold. Um, and so, so it was always a part of my personal life, and I knew what it meant for me in terms of where that transition came in terms of professionally. It really came after I graduated from my master's program, and became a social worker. While in grad school, though, I did do a paper in my loss and grief social work class, Tupac's "So Many Tears," and so I'd say that's probably the first place where I began to really explore these ideas with any kind of like serious theoretical lens. But as a practitioner, one of the things that, again, and this wasn't necessarily deliberate. There were no models. There were no research. There was no research out there. But one of the things that I prided myself on as a practitioner was trying to think of innovative ways of connecting with young people, to help not just build relationships, but also foster discussion. Like, how could we engage in these conversations that we knew were meaningful, in fun ways, in creative ways? And uh, one of the ways, I think that's most germane to this, was, um, we listened to a lot of the same music, as at that time, many moons ago. I listened to a lot of the same music, but one of the artists that was out at the time was DMX, and this is when I was working in a therapeutic group home. And one of the residence was incredibly into DMX, and I didn't realize it at the time, at the onset. I did after, when I started kind of digging into it a little bit, was DMX's history. Like, he went through the system, and he had some similarities, some home life similarities to this one young man that I work with, and that was his favorite artist. And he would write lyrics, and in those lyrics he would talk about his own, situation, and it was just, hey, what are you writing about? And that's how that opened the door to the conversation. And then I, started making that connection. And wow, oh, there's similarities in his lived experience and this person's lived experience. DMX is talking about his life and how difficult it is and how he copes and things like this. This is the same thing that this young man is writing about. And that not only, so intellectually I made that connection, but it allowed us to have conversations that maybe would not have normally been able to have, at least that easily.
Yeah.
And so that kind of began my journey of looking into it. And this was anecdotally. This wasn't, any formula or anything like that. The second major piece to this work was coming out of my experiences as a clinician, as a social worker, was also being curious about the individuals that were in helping roles. One of the challenges that I saw a lot of was a very deficit focused on the young people, right? Like, essentially, we're here to fix them.
Yeah.
You know, the community, the family's terrible, the community is terrible, and essentially they're broken and they need to be fixed. And that was not at all what I got into social work for. I was very interested in what kind of opportunities, how do we invest in young people to see them realize their potential, and so it was very different kind of focus, and a concept that I ascribed to at the time that really spoke to the spirit of what I felt I wanted to be as a practitioner, was this idea of positive youth development. And the thing that really stuck out to me is essentially, what does success look like? Does success in working with a young person look like not doing drugs, not being arrested, no risky sexual behavior, nonviolent? Or is it the things that you want to see? Greater confidence, more empathy, greater skill building, caring, pro-social character, right? So, and it seems like a little thing, but it really is different, right? Like, where am I going to invest my energy in the time that we have together? Am I going to invest my energy in making sure that you don't do certain things? Or am I going to invest my energy into helping you to achieve these things that I know will help you in the long run and connect you to the things that you're interested in and that will help you thrive? And so that really struck me, because I felt like that was one of the things that you saw noticeable differences in how people approached their, the work that they did. And so that's what I wanted.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, was there a moment where that became really clear to you? I mean,
Yes, that was in my work at the residential treatment center, and when that kind of crystallization happened, this is the other subtle hip hop piece. But it was, again, it wasn't formal, but there was an art therapist that worked with me, and he was a hip hop head too, and so we got along. But in terms of that kind of crystallization, when it became apparent, um, what we decided to do was work on a month-long campaign um, that was, and it had some sort of preventive elements to it, but it was really to kind of build community and kind of collectively aspire towards something. And so I wish I could remember all of our goals, but essentially each week we had these goals, so like it was a point level system. So I can't remember what we called it, but every week there was a campaign. And the first week was, one week was like, everyone will achieve X amount of extra points when they're, and so each week we had these campaigns, and so the art therapist, he was great at graffiti, and so he did these huge like banners in graffiti for like what we named that campaign, and it was hung up on the unit, and like everything was evolved around that. It became this collective community goal that we were working towards, and so the idea was that for 4 weeks straight, each week we'd have a new thing that we're working towards this month, right? So the whole month was all of this positive energy around us collectively working towards this thing. So it wasn't exclusively hip hop, but but there is that thread of using visual art as this kind of unifying goal that we can ascribe towards. We see it visually every day. We can all connect to it. We kind of know what the mission is, and we can use that collective energy in pursuit of that collective goal. Um, but that was kind of the crystallization, and because that was so successful, that was kind of proof of concept for me as an individual. Um, like we're on to something here, and so and that led into my next position as clinical coordinator in the group home, and so similar to now, it was a brand new program, and so I had a great role of creating in technical terms, the therapeutic milieu, right? But it was all organized around concepts of positive youth development. That undergirded everything that we did, from the types of groups, the common activities. We pulled in, kind of adventure therapy, low ropes experiences in there. So everything around that program was filtered through that positive youth development lens. Um, and so when I decided to go back to school, that was a major piece of inquiry that I was interested in. Essentially, when we think about people that are in helping positions, particularly for young people, what is it that guides their approach to practice? Is it them as individuals? Is it the program that they're a part of, kind of the culture that is there? What essentially leads to how they see themselves as a helping professional? What do they believe their role is? And how do they see the young people that they work with? Like, what do they think of them? Um, those were, I was interested in how those things might vary across different types of programs. And when we talk about types of programs, the categories that I came up with at the time were kind of traditional service-oriented programs. Like, you come here, you receive this service. What you would call youth development programs that are more overtly developmental, seeking to help young people learn something, promote, I guess, what we will call like SEL type things in today's kind of lexicon, but more aligned with this idea of we're trying to build something in young people as opposed to, just providing a service or prevention. Um, and then the third category were social justice or youth organizing programs, where programs with young people that could be youth driven or could be, adult supported, but essentially the goals were around some sort of community change effort. So, for example, one was specifically geared around improving the juvenile justice system. Well, both had that, but one was squarely on juvenile justice, and the other was juvenile justice amongst other things, but it's more kind of just community change in general. So education was like a big focus, um, and these were in California. So, for example, the education-based one at that particular time, some of the inequities in the educational system were that you could graduate from some California high schools with a 4.0 and still not have the minimum requirements to apply to some of the state universities. So,
Oh, wow.
because the schools didn't offer the requisite programs that met those minimum. And so it was a huge statewide campaign to try to ensure that there was equity across all California schools so that those types of dynamics wouldn't emerge. So that's what I mean by kind of these social justice programs. The other programs are around juvenile justice. There are a lot of inequities in the juvenile justice system within California at the time. So these were active like campaigns. Like we know that from a policy standpoint, there are concrete improvements that could and should happen. And so their efforts were in pursuit of those types of changes. So,
Wow.
so the idea was I wanted to see, okay, if we know these programs are qualitatively different, would we see differences among the individuals that worked in those spaces? And it just so happened, to kind of wrap this whole section up, it just so happened that two of those programs heavily integrated with hip hop culture. And it wasn't deliberate at the time. I'm sure it was to the extent like, oh wow, I'd love to, work in these programs, but that wasn't a part of like the equation. And so to kind of tie a bow on this part, as coming out of those experiences with the insights and things that, that I learned about helping professionals, I also learned that, wow, we can really use hip hop culture in pursuit of individual and community change, not just at the individual level. And so that's what really helped reinforce this duality in terms of where is change important, where is change necessary, and can hip hop culture be a tool in pursuit of that? And so that was kind of the jumping off point. It's like, oh wow, I need to know more about this. I need to explore more. And so that's where the research came in. Started, who else is talking about this? Ran across the work of Dr. Edgar Tyson, rest in peace. And he had done one of the initial studies comparing traditional therapeutic methods to hip hop integrated group work, and comparing, and found that, of course, the hip hop group was more effective and more desirable and more engaging. And so he really occupies a huge role. There were others that did, similar work at the time, but it was also a social worker, and so that was particularly attractive to me as a social work professional. But that really opened the door, both in terms of being inspirational, like this can be done in a rigorous way as as an independent researcher, but also because, based on my experiences and things, I felt like there were more questions, like there were other things and there were other perspectives. And so that really kind of, again, opened the door. And so I had my own questions that I wanted to pursue. And also, a big part of it is recognizing that this work is happening out there, but there still wasn't like there wasn't like theory, there wasn't a real language and structure behind, how this work could be done, uh, or at least to set the stage for like how will we do research over time to really unpack some of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now you have me curious about some of those other questions that you were wanting to ask and what you learned in the, I don't know how much time you have, but I'm so curious about those questions.
So, so at that point, one of the main question at that point in time, a lot of the work that had been done, there was some qualitative work done around, essentially up until that point. It wasn't really talked about in terms of therapeutic spaces, mental health, that kind of thing as much. There were two other pieces that essentially it was discussed in kind of an individual counseling perspective or group work perspective. But prior to that, the sort of wave of research and writing and work around hip hop fell in a couple of areas. One was just understanding like, hey, there is this great culture that exists. These things are a part of the culture. These are things that are in general affirming to different communities, and musicology was a great home for some of that early work. Just understanding it as a culture. Both in terms of the immediate, but then also some of the, diasporic roots, so linking back to griots as storytellers and carriers of knowledge, early dancing, the drum beat of the culture, remixing and things like that. And the other work that was connected to it was from a negative standpoint. It was, early research. It was exposure research. Like the more you listen to, and it was coupled with heavy metal. So essentially, the more people listen to heavy metal or rap music, the more negative outcomes there are. Right. So so anyway, those were the two main sources of information about hip hop. It was either this the greatest thing in the world, or it was the worst thing in the world, right? But one of my questions was, and based on just experience in general, it's like it can kind of be subjective. Like it doesn't need to be this or that. There are ways that it can be empowered. Well, there are ways that it could, at the time, that it could be positive or healthy, and there are ways that it could be quote unquote negative or unhealthy. And that was my first question. Is it possible that and what makes this significant is that the earlier, like Tyson's work and some of the other work at the time, was about this thing called hip hop or rap music. Like, what are your attitudes about rap music or hip hop? So it was this external thing. And so I was interested in what the impact is for the music that you listen to, right? So the question isn't about what do you think about hip hop and is it helpful or meaningful or artistic or any of those things. Is I'm interested in what you think about the music that you listen to, right? So to really personalize it, and then as well as with the idea that nothing is objectively good or bad. I was more interested in the concepts that I came up with is how is it empowering and how is it potentially risky? And so that was essentially the core of my entry into this conversation as a researcher and practitioner. In what ways is the hip hop that you engage personally empowering, and in what ways is the what you engage potentially risky? And then out of that, we could, through quantitative analysis, we could
Yeah.
find out, could those things coexist, right? Is it possible that what you engage that's personally meaningful to you can be both simultaneously empowering and risky, right? Because it could not be that way. It could be that if it's only empowering to me and not risky at all. Alternatively, it could be that it's all risky and it's not empowering. Right? Those are potential research findings that could, and you can make an argument, right? You know, the healthier you are, right, the less likely you are to get right. Um, those are all viable findings. But my hypothesis was that it does go both ways for a lot of people, and that was the initial findings. Um, and that's really important, right? Because you can kind of throw out that it's objectively just all great and amazing, and you can throw out that it's all terrible, and it opens the door to the next question. Okay, well, when is it more empowering, or how is it more? Um, and thinking about working with someone and thinking about the role of music and art in their lives, then the goal becomes, okay, how do we promote what's most empowering and how do we inhibit what's most risky, right? That's more meaningful as a helping professional to me than these just subjective ideas about just get rid of all that, right? This is all negative.
Right.
And it speaks to, just if you think about it, just on face value, right? It's how you interpret something. You could see something that is, from the outside seems negative, but you can perceive it as a cautionary tale, right? Like I listen to that, I watch that, and it helps remind me to not do things or be more intentional about it, right? So all this, but we needed to have some research to help further the conversation, and and so that was kind of the first wave of research, and then really trying to tease that out quantitatively, and out of that came the next sort of significant wave of the research was, okay, well, when we talk about empowering, like, in what ways is it empowering? And that's where we came up in that those first waves of research with these dimensions of empowerment. And the 5 dimensions that we came up with were esteem, resilience, growth, community, and change. And those echo back to a lot of what we were talking about early. So we were talking about empowerment at the individual level, esteem, resilience, and growth. Esteem is about, who am I and how am I, right? I very identity centered, and resilience. So resilience is more about thinking about, like, what is my story? What have I gone through? What are the challenges that I've faced, and how have I tried to negotiate those challenges? How have I tried to work through those obstacles? So esteem, kind of the goal is to feel better, right, about yourself and how you do. Resilience is more about doing better given your situation. And there's a lot of subtlety to all these. I'm kind of giving it in broad
Sure.
strokes. The third major area of that individual empowerment is growth, right? So it's not about necessarily feeling better about yourself. It's not about that story of coping and doing better, but it's more about being better, being the best version of yourself. Um, so it's not as much about coping with the now and kind of survival mode and just getting through, but it's more future oriented, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
where do I want to be? How can I take it to the next level? How can I be the best version of myself? And um, so it's really looking forward. It's that thriving element. You know, what contributes to thriving? It's not surviving; it's thriving. Um, uh, the other piece that's important in the growth piece is that, you know, if you think of like resilience, it's kind of like, how can I get through what I'm going through? Where the growth is, you're kind of I literally use the kind of metaphor of like walking on, you know, ice. You know, if you're walking on ice, you're looking down, you're stepping, you know, you're just trying to get by. You're looking down though. You're concerned with your footsteps. Whereas, you know, growth is really like you're lifting your head up. You're not just focused on survival mode. You're looking down the road and how do I get there? But along with that, looking up is also the opportunity for kind of mentorship and modeling. You know, I think about the younger brother, younger sister, younger cousin, or somebody, you know, that you want to give advice to and be a role model for. So it's not just about you. You're concerned about them as well. Make sure that they don't go through, you know, any lessons that you learned, that they don't go through the same situation. Um, so that's a part of growth too. Um, and so, kind of, I'll move into the community stuff in a second, but those are the narratives that you hear within the different expressive art. Music is the most obvious one, but you hear those messages regularly. You can listen to a song that came out 40 years ago, you can listen to a song that came out today. And it's not that it doesn't exist in other art or music, but it's the nature of hip hop is those are regularly embedded. That's the norm as opposed to the exception, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the density of the lyrics is just more material, um, and it's really anchored in the roots of the culture, and those values of empowerment. And so growth is the bridge to community empowerment, right? So as soon as you make it not just about yourself, and you know, you think about being a role model, you think about being a mentor, you think about the long term, that's really the bridge to community because you're starting to pay attention to what's around you. You know, what are the groups that I'm proud to belong to, the groups that I identify with, the groups that you know, I'm proud to be a part of. And, you know, that's where that sort of social identity comes in. And so that's the community dimension. So it's a kind of a better belonging, better sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and and then the last is change, but it's social change, not individual
Mm-hmm.
change. So thinking about those communities that you value and that you prioritize, uh, you know, what are the conditions that can make them collectively be at, you know, at their best, the best versions of themselves. And so, you know, so that those dimensions came out of that next phase of research. And, you know, I know this is a trauma, you know, podcast, but each of those are incredibly significant to concepts of trauma. So, you know, you think about
Yeah.
who am I and how am I? You know, if you've experienced trauma, whether it's, you know, kind of individual, isolated trauma, um, or more complex trauma, those are oftentimes significant threats to identity. And they definitely impact how you feel at any given moment, um, and how you see yourself. And so, you know, through these artistic experience, you have the opportunities to create opportunities for regulation. You have opportunities to create counter narratives and reestablish, how you see yourself, and really initiate those steps of healing. Um, when we think about the resilience dimension, being able to articulate your story in a healthy way is an enormous obstacle for many. Like, I can't even trust you to talk about, and if I do, are you going to judge me? Or there's so much um, there's so much trauma in a story that can be very challenging. Um,
Yeah.
and then how you cope. How do you cope with those difficult either emotions or experiences, or things like that? A lot of times, that's where things like self-medication and unhealthy coping and unhealthy relationships, but they're all rooted in coping, right?
Yeah.
Um, and thinking about growth. That's the extension of that. Like, how do we step into healthy decision making? What types of connections and relationships are better or healthier or more pro-social, um, you know, you know, and trauma at the community level. That's a whole nother conversation. The communities that I identify with, what types of intergenerational collective traumas have been visited on these groups that I'm a part of, and what does that mean for me
Yeah.
and for us? What types of resilience have we been able to draw upon and exhibit, and cultural strengths that have allowed us to proceed, um, to work through, and that we can replicate and uh, help. And then at the change level, how can we stop these trauma-inducing conditions that
Right.
facing? What kind of tangible things can we do? Like, that was one of the things that came out of that early research, the difference between the youth development organizations and the people that worked in youth development programs versus the social justice programs. Both said, hey, we recognize that you're going, you're in difficult situations, and you can get through it, and we're here to support you. But the youth organizing program said, and you can be a change agent. You can help make
Mm.
sure that the people that come behind you don't have to go through the same experiences that you went through. And it's a subtle difference, but it's really important. We think
Yeah.
about, what does empowerment mean in terms of community empowerment versus individual.
Yeah. And in terms of outcomes with those two different lenses, was there what did you see?
I saw, one of the greatest example that I give is, at that time, as a young doctoral student, um, you know witnessing campaigns and being involved, and being there, is I was amazed at the courage, the knowledge, the skill that these young people had. Like, it was like, even me as a person that that believed in the potential, like, that was why I was there
So
doing,
you were
like,
there.
you know, I was the number one fan. I was the believer. But it amazed me. I'm like, wow, you can just get in front of legislators and just rattle off all these policy issues and knowledge, and speak as if you have been doing this for 15 years. And these were high school kids. And so, just seeing and experiencing that level of agency in pursuit of something that was beyond them as individuals, right? There was a real belief, like, hey, what you're doing to us and the people that we care about is not okay. And something needs to change. And that's not something you just wake up with that kind of confidence, you know. Um, but that was the environment, and it wasn't the other part too. You know, when you think about underneath all this work, I didn't really talk about it, but when I talked earlier about this concept of positive youth development, that's the other piece of my research is an actual model of empowerment based positive youth development. Kind of that has nothing to do with the hip hop side of things. That's the framework of what is important in terms of healthy development at an individual time and an over the life course. And alongside this, the main finding in that piece is that these ingredients of positive development are actually interrelated. So when we talk about caring and confidence and connection, character, sense of community, and active engaged citizenship, uh, at earlier research basically said you have to kind of figure yourself out, and then the better you're able to do that, then that will allow you to contribute to your broader community. But the thing that I found out in my programming is that it works in the other direction too. So we had, some young people that were really struggling in school, that were, kind of depressed and things like that. But leadership in those programs saw potential in them. And they were invited to be a part of these campaigns. They were invited to be, to play a role in these social justice efforts. And for a lot of them, they said, it, until I got here and saw that people believed in me, and then they gave me this responsibility, and all of a sudden I was able to, contribute here and do this and lead that built up my confidence. And, and so you saw that the other way. And so that was a big piece. Certainly wasn't the only, but it was one of those pieces that helped me want to inquire and look more into, like, I think some of these things relate to each other. And so that led down research. Okay, let's do a deep dive into the research and see, okay, how does connection relate to confidence? How does confidence relate to competence? And so that led to, my empowerment-based positive youth development model. Um, and so all of the things that we talked about on the hip hop side, those are the outcomes that come from empowering engagement, right? Is the greater confidence, is thinking about what are the types of positive supportive relationships that are important or that I should invest in, right? So that's the dialogue that happens as we explore, as we use the culture to explore development and to explore individuals' relationship with their kind of social environment.
I'm really appreciating. I want to reflect kind of what something that's landing for me, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here. But there's something that I'm hearing you describe. It's like, how do I say it? Like the beingness feels like it's part of the work. Like you showing up as a clinician or in whatever role with these folks, with these youth, or whoever you're working with. Like it's the quality of your beingness and kind of their beingness. I don't know. Is there something there that I'm picking up on in your language and what you're sharing?
Well, I think kind of going to the, you know, the developmental model side of things, the empowerment-based positive youth development, at the heart of that model are two things: connection and community.
Yeah.
And, in my work with, talking with professionals, whether educators or therapists or youth workers, um, is recognizing that the most important thing is connection. positive, supportive connection. And that, it's not rocket science. You see it in research in all different capacities. And so every conversation is important. Every interaction is important. And I think that's necessary. It's absolute and it's necessary. And so for me as an individual, I don't know if that's part of the question. For me as an individual, I value that. I think that is incredibly important. And I try to model that, and stress that and underscore that, and and help people. And I think it goes back to what you asked in the beginning, about how did all this get started. I think at the root of that is that people that were in that role of helper, that connection was not rooted in positivity. It wasn't rooted in being positive and supportive, at least it wasn't 100%, right? There was a healthy proportion of that was deficit focused. There's something wrong with you, and my role is to fix it. And so I think a part of what resonated with me at that early stage was, no, I think there's more to the role than that. And so how do we uncover that? How do we learn more about that? And so I think here it is, 30 years later, 20 something years later, a lot of the evidence that's been accumulated on the way supports that, yeah, it is more than that. And we can be intentional around that. And there's some really fun and creative ways to help invest in that.
Cool. Ooh, I wish we had time to keep talking more about the fun and creative ways, because I know you've done a lot. You talked about your turntable, and there's a lot that you've done, and you've got a book out. Can you share with listeners a little bit about that work that you've done and what's out there?
Yeah, so that's been the fun part over the last roughly 10, 12 years. So my the earliest work was very lyric oriented, right? How do we take this incredible archive of empowering lyrics to inform how we consume current material, as well as explore old material to help in these conversations. So I see lyrics and songs as essentially a giant library. In the same way, your books don't hold the same cachet as they used to, but at one point in time, having a big library was helpful. It was information. It was and that's the way that I see music. Like, we have this enormously empowering archive that's just sitting there. But it also provides us essentially the blueprint. The way that I say it is like, we have a canon of these empowering narratives. And so that has kind of given permission to all artists that have come afterwards in how they can express themselves, how they can use their incredible lyrical gifts, vocabulary, just brilliant. Like, artists, that's the other part. Like, artists are brilliant, like brilliant, not like just talented, but to be able to capture such complex phenomena and life dynamics in ways that are concise and potent and powerful and creative. And so we have all of this at our disposal. So anyway, that was where the bulk of my initial work was lyric based, and I saw that other people were doing other things related to hip hop, like beat making, and I invited now a longtime colleague, Dr. Elliot Gann. I was invited to do a workshop in Oklahoma at the time, Central Oklahoma. And I saw the work that he did, and I was like, it'd be really cool for us to team up. I'll do my thing, he does his thing. And so that went great. But seeing what he did, I'm like, wait a minute, like, this is amazing, right? And it was accessible and it was engaging. And I was like, huh. And one of the challenges that, and this is, as great and creative as my work was, thinking about that resilience category that we talked about, oftentimes that's where the trauma conversations have. That's of the dimensions, that's the most potentially triggering, that's the most sensitive, that's the most, whenever you get into the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the other thing is, even though these are more creative and things, people aren't always willing to dive right into talking about stuff, even if this is an easier way. And so that began me thinking about, like, what he's doing is instantly engaging. Everybody wants to do that. Everybody wants to press buttons. They're quick wins, not like trivial, but I mean, it's like you can see the results quickly. And so that got me curious, and so he was gracious. He taught me to make beats, and not at his level, but enough to learn. And so that's when I bought my first. I did turntable stuff, but the technology is new. Right? This is a newer area of beat making and production. It's always there, but anyway, this is kind of a newer piece. But it intrigued me enough to want to learn more. So I bought my first piece of equipment. I started learning, and started seeing what other people were doing. But that really got me intrigued with the technology, and that got me interested in returning to my DJing roots and getting turntables. And so it really took me down the technology rabbit hole, but it also was my next study. And I know we're kind of running low on time, but just to kind of help bridge to kind of where we will wrap up, my next major study was, what if we coupled therapeutic beat making with my model, or that's lyric based. And so, Dr. Gann of Today's Future Sound. So I had a intern that I was working with at the time, and I trained him on my model. Dr. Gann trained him on his model, and he ran a summer program integrating our two models. But the premise was help people to engage people where they're not focused on the cognitive stuff right away, to help build rapport, kind of establish that relationship, the beginnings, and then that will make it easier to facilitate those other fun and engaging things and allow some of those conversations to take place. And so that has been a big part of my work since, is how do we integrate technology in ways that are engaging, but then also leverage all these, developmental narratives and things. And so we're really just scratching the surface. The final piece I'll end on is probably one of the most exciting things. So some of the later waves of research are around, that I've been talking a lot more about, is intentionality. Essentially, the reason that and the purpose that you engage plays a lot of significance into how empowering that engagement is. If you're passive and you're just kind of listening, or just listening to the beat, and all those kinds of things. So intentionality is a big piece. But the second part is, I've been exploring the use of haptic devices. And that is essentially, you feel the music as much as you hear it. And that I'd been just piloting it in some of the summer youth programming that I did, waiting for funding to
Nice.
try to do it at a bigger scale. But what's exciting about that is a big major study just came out last month around the connection between touch and music, and the findings that they found replicated everything that we found in the pilot. It enhances the listening experience. It works better with music that's meaningful to you. Your music, and it helps with anxiety. And so I'm super excited. That's a next piece of my work, is to really explore it more within the kind of context of the work that I'm doing. But there's so much additional work that we need to do. As I mentioned, we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, that is so exciting. I can't wait to follow and see what unfolds from this more newer work that you're doing. Very cool. Wow. Well, I want to just appreciate you and thank you for taking the time. And for those who are listening and they're like, oh, I want to get into this stuff more, what Dr. Travis is talking about. How can folks find you? Maybe tell us about your book and anything else coming out.
Yeah, so the most famous book is The Healing Power of Hip Hop. This is actually the 10th year anniversary, so it's been out for a while. But I encourage you to, if you want to understand the big picture, theoretically, conceptually, socioculturally, that's a great starting point. There are two newer books that are not by me as an individual, but that I'm a co-editor on, but that touch on a lot of these. One is Music for Inclusion and Healing in Schools. And that was one that I had the great opportunity to collaborate with Pete Dale and Pam Bernard, two researchers out of the UK, outstanding scholars, and it was a pleasure to be a part of that. And that's has individual chapters from a range of practitioners. And this was really an effort to bring as many voices to the table to think about, how this work is done. A lot, we didn't touch a ton on it, but there's a lot of stigma on, when we think about, even if you were to talk about music therapy, that brings to mind certain types of music engagement. And so we really wanted to talk about, whether it's hip hop or other electronic based music art forms, and how those can be beneficial within school spaces or in affiliation with schools. So it didn't have to be in the traditional classroom. It could be after school, summer school, but related to school settings. And then my most recent book, is a mixtape for youth violence prevention. So it's thinking about youth violence prevention. Had the honor to work with Dr. Paul Boxer on that one, and really, it was an effort to bring together traditional ideas around youth violence prevention, along with not more innovative, but newer ideas that aren't as familiar, but that have a strong evidence base. We use the musical mixtape idea to, kind of replicate, when we think about, making a mixtape back in the days, you kind of bring together these things that are meaningful and valuable in a way that, reach your goal. But I'm really proud of that book. And there are hip hop based chapters, or chapters based on hip hop integrated work in that. There's one by me, and then another by Dr. Abdullah Deal out of Chicago. Some of the incredible work that he's done. But these we have over 20 chapters, and they touch across the board, essentially from every particular type of intervention, from community gardens to, hospital-based gunshot, violence prevention. So it really cuts across the spectrum. But that book came out last year. Incredibly proud of that. I encourage folks to check that out as well. If you're interested in connecting with me, I guess the famous term is Google me, and you'll see it pop up. But you can reach me at Dr. Travis at udel.edu. That's my University of Delaware email address. You can find me on social media at RAPTJR. Google Scholar, if you're interested in some of the research articles. I know I talked about the books, but there are also research articles that do deep dives into more nuanced elements of this work, which is also can be very informative and valuable. And it's a couple of podcasts and videos if you want to see me kind of wax poetic about some of this work as well.
Amazing. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I just so appreciate the work you're doing in the world and how you're touching lives. And just really grateful that you've taken this time to be with us.
Thank you for the space to be able to share about this work, and much respect to you for having this platform for people to hear great voices and information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more information about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at complextraumatrainingcenter.com/transforming trauma. You can also connect with us in other ways. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. As a mental health professional, your commitment to healing and growth inspires us. We at the Complex Trauma Training Center are committed to supporting you in your well-being and success. That's why we are honored to invite you to our Space Program 2026, an inner development program of support and self-discovery for therapists on the personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal levels. Running over 6 online sessions in 2026, this interactive experiential learning program is designed to support self-care and self-discovery for therapists exploring internally, relationally, and transpersonally. CTTC faculty will welcome you into a professional community of therapists that are seeking to create greater effectiveness and resilience in our professional lives. As CTTC faculty Brad Kammer says, the intent is that this program will help us not only become more effective therapists, but also love our work more. Please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com and secure your spot in the 2026 Space Program. Thanks to Rig for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.